I smelled the fear on the town before I ever saw its rooftops, and a king learns to trust his nose before his eyes. The road down into Coldwater Crossing ran through dust the color of old bone, and I walked it on foot with my boots worn gray and a stranger's name in my mouth. Rook, not Torin, not Vale, not Alpha King of the Highfell, whose banners the packs of 6 Valleys bowed to. Just Rook, a drifter with a bad cloak and a week of road beard, come looking for work he did not need and answers he did. For 3 seasons my trade roads had been strangling. Wagons that once ran the river crossing free were coming home to the Highfell half-loaded, and their drivers gray with something they would not name. Tolls no one had agreed to. Wolves in the reeds who watched the road and let it be known they were watching. I could have ridden down with 200 warriors and burned the answer out of the crossing in an afternoon. But a king who only ever arrives crowned never learns the truth of his own borders. Men lie to a crown. They tell it what keeps their heads on. So I left my crown in the mountains, and my guard 3 ridges back with orders to wait for my word or my death. And I came down alone to see with a common man's eyes what the crown was never shown. The crossing sat where the Coldwater River shallowed enough to ford, a huddle of timber and stone gone silver with sun. A mill turned at the water's edge, its great wheel groaning. A market square baked empty in the noon heat. And over all of it hung that smell, not blood, not yet, but the sourness of a place where people had learned to keep their eyes on the ground. The trough stood in the square's center, fed by a pipe from the mill race, and my throat was a dry road of its own. I went to it. I bent. I drank from my cupped hands like any tired man. That was when they came. 4 of them, and they came the way wolves come when they have never once been made to pay for it, loose, grinning, spread wide so the square became a thing with walls. Their leader was young and broad and handsome in the way a blade is handsome, all edge and no warmth, his jaw squared, a wolf's arrogance sitting on him like a coat he'd been born in. He wore good boots. In a town this poor, good boots told me everything. That water's the Iron Brooks, he said. Everything that touches this square is, you drink, you pay. I straightened slowly, water in my beard, and let my shoulders round the way a beaten man's do. I had played the low card my whole life in that square, though I had never set foot in it before. I've got no coin, friend, I said, only the road. Then you've got nothing we want. He came closer. His 3 shadows drifted wider, which means you're nothing, and we clean nothing out of our square. He looked me up and down, the gray boots, the bad cloak, the road beard, and whatever he saw, it was exactly what I dressed to be. Contempt, easy and total. On your knees, drifter, lick it back up, every drop you stole. Behind my ribs, something wanted to answer him with the truth. I have felt a full-grown alpha lose the color in his face just from the way I said his name. This boy would have wept, but I had not come to be Torin. I had come to watch, and a watcher swallows a great deal. So I bent my knee, slowly, for the road, for the crossing, for the answer. I never touched the ground. A voice cut across the square, clear, low, and shaking not from cowardice but from the effort of being brave anyway. Leave him be, Garrick. Every head turned. I turned with them. She had come out of the mill's shadow, a sack of grain still balanced on one hip, flour ghosting her forearms to the elbow. Her dress was the color of nothing, washed past color, mended past pride, and her hair was bound back hard the way you bind it when you have no time to be anything but useful. She was thin in the way of someone who is always given the smallest share. And she stepped down off the mill's stone lip and put herself between the boy in good boots and the drifter on one knee, and she did it the way you'd step in front of a falling wall, knowing you cannot stop it, only that you cannot stand aside. And the whole clamor of the world dropped away from me. It was not a thing I heard. It was a thing that arrived. In one breath the square was dust and heat, and 4 wolves grinning, and in the next there was her, and the certainty came up through the soles of my feet and stood in my chest like a house I'd owned my whole life and only now walked into. I had ridden the 6 valleys. I had let my council parade every eligible daughter of every high line before me, one after another, year on year, and felt nothing but the ache of an empty hall. I had told myself the moon had simply passed my name over. I had believed it. I did not believe it anymore. I knew her. Not her name, not her face, not one true thing about her life, and I knew her, the way you know your own name spoken across a dark room. Every hair on my arms rose. The scar on my shoulder, where a rival's teeth had found me at 19, went warm as a coal for no reason at all. Mine said something under speech, under thought, older than my crown and surer than my own heartbeat. There she is. There she has always been. And she was standing in front of Garrick Voss, heir of the Ironbrook, defending a beggar she did not know, with flour on her arms and terror in her eyes and her chin up all the same. Elowen, Garrick said her name like a man setting down something he means to pick back up. You forget yourself. He has no coin. Her voice steadied as she went, the way a voice does when a person decides they are already in it, so they may as well go all the way. It's water, Garrick, it falls out of the sky. You'll take a man to his knees over the sky. I'll take him to his knees over the fact that it's mine. Garrick's grin had gone. That was the danger in him, the grinning ones you can read, but the cold that came down over his face now was the cold of someone who had never in his life been refused and did not have the shape in him to bear it. And I'll take you over the fact that you're mine, girl. Or had you forgotten that too? I watched her flinch at that, a small, buried flinch, quickly hidden, and I felt my own hands change. Under the road dirt, under the disguise, the claws I had kept sheathed my whole time in that square wanted daylight. I put them back. Not yet. Not like this. A king who reveals himself to save one moment saves nothing. He only teaches his enemy who to fear. I had to know the whole of it first. But by the moon it cost me. I've forgotten nothing, Elowen said quietly. I know exactly what I am here. The way she said it, flat, without pity for herself, a fact worn smooth by too much handling, told me more about Coldwater Crossing than a month of watching would have. She was not defending me because she thought it would go well for her. She was defending me because she had already decided, long before I ever walked in, what kind of person she was going to be in a place that gave her every reason to be otherwise. That is the rarest thing in the world. I have ruled thousands and met it a handful of times. Garrick looked at me, he looked at her. And a man like that, when he cannot win the moment cleanly, chooses instead to make someone pay later for the fact that he could not. Fine, he said, stepping back, spreading his hands, generous as a snake. The drifter drinks on you, Elowen. Everything he takes you owe, same as everything else. He smiled again, and it was worse than the cold. Put it on the ledger. Then he and his three shadows drifted back out through the walls they had made of themselves, boots loud on the baked ground, and the square let its breath out. She stood there a moment, breathing, the grain still on her hip. Then she turned to me, and the fear went out of her face, and something plainer came in, a kind of resigned kindness. The kindness of someone who helps because it is in her to help and has stopped expecting anything back for it. You should go, she said, truly. There's nothing for a stranger here but debt. I got up off my knee. I made myself do it slowly, an old drifter's stiff rising, though everything in me wanted to stand like what I was. You put yourself in the wolf's path, I said, for a beggar you've never seen. Why? She looked at me as if the question made no sense. Because he was going to make you kneel, she said, and you didn't want to. That was all, as if it were obvious, as if it were nothing. And I, who had been kneeled to my whole life, who had forgotten there was anything remarkable in a man wishing to keep his feet, stood in the dust of a poor river town, and felt something crack quietly open in me that had been shut so long I'd stopped knowing it was a door. What's your name, Drifter? She asked. Rook, I said. The lie tasted strange now, spoken to her. Rook, she shifted the grain higher. Well, Rook, you cost me a day's wage for a mouthful of water. If you want to be useful instead of expensive, the mill always needs hands. It doesn't have to pay much, and old Harlan won't say no to a strong back. She was already turning away. But if you've any sense at all, you'll take the road out before nightfall and let the Ironbrook forget your face. And if I've no sense. She glanced back. Just for a heartbeat, something almost like the ghost of a smile touched her tired mouth, there and gone. Then I'll see you at the mill, she said, and I'll try not to let them kill you before you learn better. She walked back into the shadow of the wheel. I watched her go, flower-ghosted and thin, and carrying a whole town's cruelty on a back that would not bend, and I made a decision no king of the Highfell had ever made before me. I stayed. The mill belonged to a bent old wolf named Harlan, whose hands shook and whose eyes did not, and he took one look at my shoulders and put me to hauling before he'd learned my false name. That suited me. A man hauling grain sacks fades into the wall. A man fading into the wall hears things. And what I heard over the first days built the shape of cold water crossing the way water builds a channel, one small telling thing running into the next. I heard that the Ironbrook had not always ruled here. Old Malik Voss, Garrick's father, had come down out of the northern spurs a dozen years back with more teeth than the crossing could answer, and he had not conquered it so much as leaned on it until it agreed to be leaned on. He had never troubled to rule well. He only troubled to be feared, and he'd raised his son to think that fear was the same as strength, which is the mistake that ends every line that makes it. Now Malik was old and sick and rarely left his hall, and Garrick ran the crossing in his name, and Garrick had discovered a thing his father never fully had, that a town too tired to fight will feed you not just its coin but its dignity, if you only take it a little at a time. The tolls on my roads made sense to me now. The Ironbrook were not raiders. They were something duller and more patient. A foot pressed slowly down on a neck, always a little harder, always testing whether the neck would still bear it. My border was simply the far edge of that foot. And I heard about Elowen. I heard it in pieces, the way you hear anything shameful in a small place, not told to me, but let slip and looked away from. Her father had been the crossing's tanner, a decent man by the sound of it, and 3 winters back he had taken sick and being decent had borrowed against a cure that did not come. He borrowed from the Ironbrook, because in Coldwater Crossing there was no longer anyone else to borrow from. Then he died, and the Ironbrook do not forgive a debt just because the man who owed it has stopped breathing. Debt, in Malik's law, ran down the blood. So the tanner's daughter had been made to answer it, not in coin, she had none, but in her days. She worked the mill for wages that went straight into the Ironbrook's ledger against a sum that never seemed to shrink, because they set the interest and they kept the book. She was, in every way that mattered, bound. A bondservant to a debt she had not made, in a town that had decided long ago it was easier to pity her than to help her. And because she was young, and though no one in that hard place would let themselves say it plainly, because she was lovely under the flower and the exhaustion, Garrick Voss had let it be known that when the debt could not be paid, and it could never be paid, he would take payment in the only currency left. He would take her to his hall, as his, and call it mercy. She knew all of it. That was the thing I could not stop turning over. She lived inside that arithmetic every single day, saw the trap close a little more with every sunrise, and still she had stepped in front of a stranger's knees over a mouthful of water. A person who has been given nothing but reasons to close her hand, and keeps it open anyway. I had spent my whole reign looking for that and calling it a Luna, and I had never once found it in a hall full of daughters bred to be found. I found it at a mill, in the dust, going quietly to ruin, and no one in the whole valley thought it was worth saving. I began, without deciding to arrange my days around her. Small things, a drifter's things. When the heaviest sacks came, I took them before she could reach them, and grumbled about my own strength so she'd think it laziness and not care. When Harlan's temper turned on her over some fault that was never hers, I found a way to be loud and clumsy nearby so his temper turned to me instead, and I could bear the old man shouting easily. It slid off a king like rain off stone. When she ate her midday crust alone at the water's edge, sitting apart because the town had taught her that her place was apart, I took to eating mine a little way down the bank, not close enough to crowd her, just close enough that she was not alone with the river. For a long while she said little. She had learned, I think, that kindness in cold water crossing was a thing to be suspicious of, because it usually turned out to be a hook. But water wears stone, and a crust eaten near another crust is its own slow language, and one evening she spoke first. "Why are you still here, Rook?" The sun was going down red over the cold water and turning the whole surface to hammered copper. I sat with my back against a piling and my false name in my mouth, and I told her the truest thing I could without telling her the truest thing of all. "I've been looking for something a long time," I said. "Longer than I like to admit. I'd about decided it wasn't anywhere. Then I came here." "And it's here," she almost laughed, a small, disbelieving breath. "In cold water crossing, people come here to lose things, Rook. Nobody finds anything." "I did," I said, and looked at her when I said it, and did not look away. Whatever was in my face made her look down at her hands. Flour still ringed her knuckles no matter how she scrubbed. "Don't," she said quietly. "Whatever that is, don't. You don't know what I am here." "You keep saying that." I kept my voice easy, a drifter's voice, but the words underneath it were the truest I'd spoken in years. As if what a place has decided you are is the same as what you are. She was quiet a while. The river ran copper and then bronze and then the deep near black of water under a dying sky. When she spoke again, her voice had changed lower and stripped, as if she'd decided to stop guarding it for once. "My father used to say the moon marks everyone with something," she said. "A gift. That everybody's born carrying one thing that's theirs, that no debt and no man can take if they can only find it." She pulled her knees up, wrapped her flower-ringed arms around them. "I used to lie awake trying to find mine. I thought it might be, I don't know, something. I thought I might matter when I was small, a breath. Then he got sick and I found out what I was for. I'm for paying. That's the mark I got, Rook. I'm the girl who pays." I have heard grown warriors, dying, say less true and terrible things than that. And I sat there with my kingdom 3 ridges away and my crown in the mountains, and I wanted, more than I have ever wanted anything, to tell her exactly what she was. To say the wolves of 6 valleys will kneel to you and mean it, that the mark you were looking for is the one that stood you up in the dust to shield a beggar, that I have hunted you across a lifetime of empty halls, and you were here the whole time paying for a dead man's medicine. I wanted to lift her out of that arithmetic with both hands and set her somewhere the sun reached. But a king who lifts a person out of her chains before she has chosen him has only changed the hand that holds the chain. I would not be another man who decided her life for her. So I said the only true thing I could that was still small enough for a drifter to say. "Your father was right," I said, "about the mark. He was only wrong about which one is yours." She looked at me then, really looked in the last of the light, and something moved behind her eyes that I would spend the rest of my life trying to deserve, not hope exactly. She was too worn for hope, but the memory of hope. The place where hope had been, uncovered for a moment like a coal you thought had gone out. That was the night the wolves came to the reeds. I felt them before I heard them, the prickle along the neck that one alpha feels of another's kind. But these were not Ironbrook wolves, not the hard-eyed pack that lounged in the square. These were the wild ones, the valley's own, the great gray shapes that lived in the deep folds of the hills and answered to no man's law that even Malik Voss in 12 years had never brought to heel. 3 of them stood at the edge of the reeds where the bank went to shadow, still as carved things, and they were not looking at me. They were looking at her. Aloan had not seen them yet. And I watched the wild wolves of Coldwater Crossing hold themselves motionless at the edge of the dark, ears forward, heads low. in the exact posture a wolf takes before a thing it has decided is above it. And I understood a piece of what I was seeing, and the rest of it stole the breath clean out of me. They knew her too. Rook, she'd felt my stillness. What is it? I made myself easy. Nothing, I said. The dark playing tricks. And I turned her gently back toward the mill with a word about the cold coming, and behind us the three great shapes melted into the reeds without a sound, and I walked her home with my heart going like a war drum under a drifter's bad cloak. Because now I knew, not guessed knew, she was not merely mine. She was moon-marked, deep and true, in the old way the songs remembered and the world had mostly forgotten, the way that comes perhaps once in 100 years, where the wild things themselves recognize a soul the way iron recognizes the lodestone. Her father had been right and had died not knowing how right. The mark she had spent her childhood aching for, and her womanhood grieving, was the rarest one there is. And the town that owned her, the pack that ledgered her days, the boy in good boots who meant to take her as payment, not one of them had the eyes to see they were putting a chain on the throat of the truest Luna the valley had turned up in living memory. I lay awake in Harlan's loft that night with the mill wheel groaning under me, and I did the thing a king does. I planned. Not a rescue. She'd taught me already that a rescue done to her was just a new owner. What I planned was harder and slower and worth more. I would let her come to know the man before she ever knew the king. I would let her choose freely in the dark, a drifter with nothing. And only then, when the choosing was already hers and hers alone, would I let the world learn what she had chosen and what I was, so that no one could ever say she'd been bought a second time, by a crown instead of a debt. I did not know I was already running out of time. The trouble with a patient plan is that cruelty is often faster. It came at the turning of the season, when the harvest market filled the square. The 1 week of the year Coldwater Crossing pretended to be alive, when the outland farmers brought grain and the tinkers came, and even the Ironbrook loosened their fist a little because a squeezed market pays less than a happy one. Stalls went up. A fiddler played. For a few days the town almost forgot the foot on its neck. I worked those days as rook, hauling and lifting, and I watched Aloan move through the market with her ledger-bound errands, and twice I caught her laughing, actually laughing, at something a farmwife's child did, and the sound of it went into me and lodged there like an arrowhead I'd carry gladly the rest of my life. I thought, watching her laugh in the 1 week she was let to, that I would tear that foot off this town's neck if I never did another kingly thing. I did not have to wait long for the chance to want it more. On the market's 3rd day, Garrick Voss came into the square in his good boots with his father's authority on his shoulders and 6 of the Ironbrook at his back, and he did not come to trade. He came to the mill's stall, where Aloan stood tallying sacks, and he set a rolled parchment down on the boards in front of her, and the square went quiet the way it had gone quiet around the trough my first hour in town. "The debt's called," Garrick said, loud enough for the market to hear, because a man like that never does his cruelty in private. The audience is half the point. "My father's not going to last the winter. He wants his books closed before he goes. Yours is the last one open." He tapped the parchment. "It can't be paid. You know it can't, so it's settled the other way. You come to the hall tonight as mine." He smiled at her, and there was even something in it that he genuinely believed was generosity. "It's clean, Aloan, it's mercy. You'll want for nothing better than this." He gestured at the flour, the mill, the poor square. "Say yes, and it's kind. Say no," the smile stayed, the eyes went to winter, "and it stops being kind, and the debt gets collected the hard way, from you and from anyone soft enough to have helped you. And there's been talk of who's been helping you." His eyes came to me then across the square, just for a moment. And I understood that the drifter had been noticed after all, and that my small kindnesses at the mill had put not just me but her in the path of this. A patient king had been too patient. I had cost her the very thing I'd stayed to guard. Aloan stood very still behind the stall, and I saw her do the arithmetic she'd lived inside for 3 years, and I saw her come to the answer she'd always known was coming, the answer the whole town had watched approach and let approach. Her hands, flower-ringed, went flat on the boards to hold herself up. "And if I come," she said, and her voice was steady, moon help her, it was steady, "the debt's cleared, truly cleared, and no one else pays for it, no one who helped." "On my word," Garrick said. "Your word," she almost smiled. It was the saddest thing I have ever seen. "All right, your word." She lifted her chin. She had decided, I saw, to pay this the way she had paid everything, with her back straight, giving them the coin but not the satisfaction. "Then I'll come, tonight. And you'll leave the mill and Harlan and the drifter out of it. That's the price of my yes." "Eloin," I started forward. "Stay where you are, Rook." She did not even look at me. She said it low and fierce, and I understood. She was buying my safety with her whole life, and she would not have me spend her purchase for her. "You don't know what you'd be walking into. Stay out of it and live. That's the one thing you can do for me. Do it." And there it was, the trap closed. The kind girl, paying to the last, buying strangers' safety with her own future, in a square full of people who would let her. I have knelt to very little in my life. I have made kings kneel to me. But I will tell you what I did in that square, in the drifter's bad cloak, with the fiddler gone silent and the whole harvest market holding its breath. I stepped out into the open, and I stopped playing small. "No," I said. Not loud. I did not need loud. I had spent 30 days making my voice into a beaten man's voice, and now I simply stopped and let it be what it truly was, and a voice that has commanded armies does not need to be raised to change the air in a square. Garrick's head came around. His 6 wolves felt it before he did. I saw 2 of them shift their weight, uneasy, not knowing why the drifter suddenly stood like that, why the dust seemed to have gone quiet around him. "You'll not take her," I said, "not as payment, not for mercy, not tonight and not any night." I looked at Eloin and I made her the one promise I had left. "You'll not pay this, it's already paid." "Rook," her face had gone white. "Rook, stop, you don't understand what he—" "I understand exactly what he is." I did not look away from her. "I've understood since the day you stood in front of him for me over a mouthful of water. I've been trying to give you time. I've run out of it, and so I'll have to give you the truth instead, and I'm sorry it comes like this, in a market, with him watching. You deserved it soft. You've deserved everything soft and been given nothing, and it ends today." Garrick laughed, but it cracked in the middle, because some animal part of him had begun to understand that the shape in front of him was not the shape he'd been mocking for a month. "Who," he said, "in the name of every dead god, do you think you are, Drifter?" I did not answer him with words. I answered him the old way, the way that cannot be argued with, that no ledger can outweigh, that Malik Voss in all his 12 years of leaning had never once been able to command. I called. Not aloud. I loosed the thing I had kept chained in my chest for 30 days and 3 ridges, the whole weight of what I was, the Alpha King of the Highfell, to whom the wolves of 6 valleys bow, and I let it roll out across Coldwater Crossing like the note of a great bell struck at last. And the valley answered. They came out of the hills. They came out of the reeds and the market's edges and the shadows between the stalls, and they came in numbers no one in that square had ever seen gathered in the light of day, the wild wolves of the Coldwater, gray and vast and silent, 20 and then 40, and then more than anyone could count, pouring down into the square like water finding its channel at last. The market screamed and scattered. The Ironbrook wolves broke and fell back against the stalls, their teeth bared in terror, understanding far too late that the pack they'd thought they ruled this valley over had never been the true one, had only been waiting, all these years, for the one it truly answered to. And out of the very center of them, parting the great gray tide like a prow, came my own. My moon wolf, the great pale one near white, tall as a yearling colt, that had run at my side since I first took the Highfell throne and had waited these 30 days 3 ridges back with my guard for the word I now, at last, had given. It crossed the square through the scattering market with its head high and its eyes on me, and the wild wolves gave way before it, and it came to where I stood in my drifter's cloak, and it stopped. And it knelt. It went down on its forelegs in the dust of Coldwater Crossing, that huge pale creature, its great head lowered to me in the sight of the whole town. The ancient obeisance, the wolf's tell that cannot be faked and cannot be bought, the one thing in all the world that says without a word here is the true king. And behind it, in a wave that ran out across the square like wind laying a field of wheat, every wild wolf in the valley knelt too. Gray heads went down by the dozens. The Ironbrook's own wolves, shaking, warring with themselves, and then, one by one, unable to do otherwise, going down as well, because a wolf cannot refuse the true throne any more than water can refuse the sea. Garrick's 6 knelt. The market's stray curs knelt. From the direction of the Voss Hall I heard, faint and terrible, the howl of old Malek's own guard wolves as they went down too, wherever they stood, to a king they had never seen. The whole valley knelt. And in the center of it, on her feet, the only soul in Coldwater Crossing still standing besides me, was Elowen, flower-ringed and white-faced and staring at the drifter she had shielded and fed and sat beside on the riverbank, as the truth of me broke over her like a wave. "Rook," she whispered, then understanding, "No. Not Rook." "Torin," I said, my true name given to her first of all the world, Torin Vale of the Highfell. I let the drifter's cloak fall from my shoulders into the dust. Alpha King of the 6 valleys, of which this one is the least and the most misgoverned, and to whom the Ironbrook have been quietly stealing tolls for 3 seasons, which is why I came and put on rags and stood at your trough. I took 1 step toward her, through the sea of kneeling gray. "That's the truth I owed you. And here's the rest of it, and it's the truer half. I came looking for a boarder. I found you. And I have spent 30 days as a beggar so that when I told you what you are, you'd already know the man saying it, so no one, not ever, could tell you you'd been bought again." She could not speak. Her hands had come up to her mouth. All around her the wolves knelt in the sunlight and she stood in the middle of them, and I watched her understand, at last, what her father had meant, and how wrong he'd been about which mark was hers. "They knew you before I told you a word," I said gently, and I gestured to the wild ones bowed all around her. "That first night on the bank, 3 of them came out of the reeds, and they weren't looking at me. The valley's own wolves. They don't kneel to Malek Voss. They never did. They kneel to 2 things in all this world alone, the true king." I laid my hand flat on my chest, "and the true Luna." I lowered my hand. "You're not the girl who pays. You never were. You're the one this whole valley has been waiting for as long as I have. The mark you spent your life aching for is the rarest one there is, and every wild thing in these hills saw it in you before you'd give me a crust by the water." Garrick found his voice from where he knelt, unable to rise, his good boots useless in the dust. This is a trick," he gasped. "Some drifter's trick, some." "Look at your own wolves, boy," I said, not even turning to him. "Look at your fathers, look at yourself on your knees and try to stand." He could not. None of them could. "There's no trick. There's only the throne you leaned on this valley pretending you held and the truth of who it always answered to. The tolls are ended. The leaning is ended. And the debt." I looked at Elowen, and I made my voice as soft as it had ever been for anyone. "The debt your father borrowed against a cure that never came, that you've paid 3 years of your one life against, that this boy meant to collect from your very body and call it mercy. It's forgiven," I said. "By the crown, in full, struck from every book in this valley tonight forever. You owe the Ironbrook nothing, you owe me nothing. You are the freest soul in Coldwater Crossing as of this breath, and the first thing I want you to do with that freedom," and here my voice did break, a little, king or no king, "is only this. To know that you can do anything at all, stay, go, turn from me. You've been given no choices your whole life. So I give you the first one, and it's the whole of everything, and it's yours alone. I am asking, not taking, never taking. I'm asking whether a beggar you were kind to might be allowed to spend the rest of his days being kind to you." The square was utterly silent but for the river, and the breathing of 100 wolves. Elowen looked at me. She looked at the pale wolf kneeling in the dust between us. She looked at the wild ones bowed all around her, at the Ironbrook broken, at the market folk peering white-faced from behind their scattered stalls, the whole town that had ledgered her and pitied her and let her walk toward that hall alone. And then she looked back at me, and the tears came, but they were not the tears of the girl who pays. They were something I had waited my whole reign to be looked at with. "You ate your crust down the bank from me," she said, her voice shaking, "so I wouldn't be alone with the river." "Yes," I said. "You took the heavy sacks and pretended you were only lazy." "Yes." "You let old Harlan shout at you so he wouldn't shout at me." "Every time." "You were a king." She laughed and wept and pressed her flower-ringed hands to her face. "You were a king, and you carried grain, and you sat in the dust, and you never once," her breath caught. "You could have taken me out of it any hour of any day, and you didn't. You waited, so it would be mine to choose." "It could never have been anything else," I said, "not with you. I knew that in the first hour, when you'd rather stand in a wolf's path than let a stranger be made to kneel. I'm not here to be one more thing that happens to you, Elowen. I'm here to be the thing you choose." She crossed the square to me then, through the sea of kneeling gray, past the pale wolf, and she stopped an arm's length away with the tears bright on her face, and she asked me the only question that a soul who has been owned her whole life could think to ask. "And if I choose you," she whispered, "will you still let me be the girl who steps in front of the falling wall? Will you let me keep the one thing that was ever really mine?" And I understood that she was not asking to be rescued. She had never wanted rescuing. She wanted only to be met. "I'll do better," I said. "I'll stand in the wall's path beside you, and let the whole valley learn what you already taught me in the dust, that keeping your feet and keeping your open hand is the strongest thing there is." I held out my own hand, ringed still with the road dirt of the beggar I'd been for her. "Choose, Elowen. Whatever you choose, this valley is free of the Ironbrook by dawn regardless. That's not the offer. The offer is only me." She put her flower-white hand in mine. And the wolves rose. Not the Ironbrook, they stayed down and would stay down. I made sure of that in the days after, though I spilled no blood I did not have to. Old Malik I let die in his hall as an old man rather than a lesson, and Garrick I sent north to the empty spurs his family came from, stripped of his good boots and his authority, and his lie that fear is strength, to learn the one from the other if he had it in him. But the wild wolves of the valley rose, all of them at once, 100 gray shapes lifting out of their obeisance, and they did not turn to me. They turned to her. They came to Elowen where she stood with her hand in mine, and they pressed close around her, and the great pale one, my own, rose last and went to her and lowered its huge head under her free hand. And she, who had been given nothing all her life, who had ached as a child to find the one thing that was hers, laid her trembling flower-ringed fingers on the moonwolf's brow and understood at last and forever exactly what she was. The girl who pays, that's what a cruel town had written in its book. The moon-marked Luna the whole valley had waited 100 years for. That's what was written in the older book, the one that runs in the blood and the wild things and can never be ledgered away. We were wed at the turning of the next moon, not in my great hall in the Highfell, but there, at Coldwater Crossing, on the riverbank where I'd eaten my crust down the way from hers, because she asked for it, and I would have moved the mountains to give her far less. The whole freed valley came. Harlan wept and pretended it was the wind. The market fiddler played until his fingers bled and grinned the whole time. And the wild wolves lined the far bank in the dusk like a gray honor guard, still and shining, for the Luna they'd known before I ever told her a word. I have ruled a long time since. I rule differently now. I no longer let my council parade daughters before an empty throne. The throne is not empty. I no longer trust a crown to be told the truth. When a boarder strangles, I still, sometimes, put on a bad cloak and walk down into it on foot, though never for as long, because There is someone in the Highfell now who worries. And when the wagons of the 6 valleys pass through Coldwater Crossing, free of every toll forever, by a law with her name on it, the drivers tell a story to their children about the harvest day the whole valley knelt, and how the girl everyone had written off as the one who pays turned out to be the one thing no debt could ever buy. But that is not the part I keep. The part I keep is smaller, and it is mine. It is a poor square, and a trough, and a boy in good boots telling a beggar to get on his knees, and a thin girl, ghosted to the elbow in flour, with terror in her eyes and her chin up all the same, stepping down off the mill's stone lip to put herself between the cruelty and me over nothing, over a mouthful of water, because she had already decided long before I ever came what kind of soul she was going to be. I was a king, and I had knelt to nothing in my life. She never knew it that first hour. She only knew a stranger didn't want to kneel, and that was reason enough for her to spend herself to stop it. That is the whole of why I love her, not the mark, not the wolves, that. She kept me on my feet before she ever knew I had a throne, and every dawn of my life since, I have tried to be worth the girl who wouldn't let a beggar go down in the dust.